The hunters become the hunted. How the P-51 Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's spirit. January 5, 1944. 23,000 feet above Oschersleben, Germany. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke banks his Messerschmitt Bf 109 away from the American bomber formation, diving hard for the sanctuary of German-controlled airspace. His fuel gauge reads critical. His ammunition is spent. Standard procedure: attack the bombers, break contact when the stubby P-47 Thunderbolts get too close, then dive away. The Americans always turn back somewhere over Western Germany. Always. Through his headset comes the voice of his wingman. They're still following us. Knoke glances back. Silver fighters, sleeker than P-47s, are staying with them through the dive. At 15,000 feet, at 10,000, all the way to the deck. Knoke's hands tighten on the stick. For 3 years, German pilots had owned one precious advantage: sanctuary. There was always a line the Americans couldn't cross, a point where their fuel forced them home. On January 5, 1944, that line disappeared. What? The Luftwaffe didn't know. What they couldn't yet comprehend was that these silver fighters would systematically destroy not just their aircraft, but their will to fight. This is the story of the P-51 Mustang, told through the eyes of the men who learned to fear it. The story of how confident defenders became hunted prey. The story of how superior range became a weapon of psychological warfare. In the autumn of 1943, Luftwaffe fighter pilots defending the Reich operated under a comforting tactical reality. Major Gunther Roll, already credited with over 200 kills on the Eastern Front, described it in his combat diary. The Americans bring their heavy bombers deep into Germany, but their fighters are chained to short leashes. We need only survive the initial engagement, then withdraw to our bases. They cannot follow. This was mathematical certainty. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary American escort fighter in late 1943, could barely reach the German border from English bases. The Supermarine Spitfire, deadlier in a turning fight, had even less range. German tactical doctrine had evolved around this limitation. The Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader, fighter wings, developed a proven pattern: climb above the bomber formations, dive through the defensive fire to attack, then break contact when the escorts converged. The American fighters would chase for perhaps 5 minutes, maybe 10, then their fuel situation would force a 180-degree turn back to England. We owned the sky over Germany. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke wrote in his diary on November 12, 1943. The Thunderbolts come, we fight, they leave. Then the bombers are alone, and we resume the attack. The system works. Jagdgeschwader 26, the famous Schlageter fighter wing, recorded the numbers that proved Knoke's confidence. Of 47 aerial engagements with American escorts between August and November 1943, in 43 instances the German fighters successfully disengaged by diving east, forcing the American escorts to abandon pursuit due to fuel constraints. Luftwaffe pilots learned to read their opponent's behavior. When P-47 formations began banking westward, it meant their fuel was critical. That was the signal. The hunters were leaving. The bombers were vulnerable again. Major Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, Geschwader Commodore of JG-77, explained the psychology in a post-war interview. We knew we were being bled. We knew we were losing pilots faster than training could replace them. But we also knew we could survive each mission if we fought smartly. Hit the bombers hard, then dive away from the escorts. Every pilot who mastered this technique could expect to survive. We had sanctuaries. At Luftwaffe bases across northern Germany, this tactical doctrine shaped training and morale. New pilots arriving at operational squadrons learned the fundamental rule: respect the American escorts, but understand their limitations. Engage when you have advantage. Disengage when they converge. They must leave. You can stay. Your base is 20 minutes away. Theirs is 90 minutes away. Use that. Hauptmann Walter Nowotny, the Luftwaffe's highest-scoring pilot against Western Allied aircraft, with 258 confirmed kills, embodied this confidence. In November 1943, he transferred from the Eastern Front to defend the Reich, bringing with him a reputation for aggressive, precise combat. "I studied the American tactics," he told fellow pilots at Bad Werashofen airfield. "They are predictable. Their escorts defend the bombers but cannot sustain deep penetration. We have room to maneuver." The statistics supported his assessment. In the third quarter of 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 9.1% of dispatched bombers on deep penetration raids into Germany. The loss rate was unsustainable, and the Americans knew it. On October 14, 1943, a raid on Schweinfurt cost 60 bombers destroyed and 138 damaged, a 26% loss rate. The Luftwaffe had demonstrated what unlimited defensive time over the target meant. Without continuous escort coverage, American daylight bombing was approaching operational impossibility. Luftwaffe intelligence reports from November 1943 acknowledged American attempts to extend escort range through external fuel tanks, but analysts dismissed the threat. The P-47 with additional fuel tanks still cannot reach Munich or Berlin. Read one assessment, circulated to fighter wings. The P-38 Lightning has range, but inferior performance above 25,000 feet. The Spitfire remains confined to channel operations. No technical solution to the escort problem appears imminent. German pilots internalized this intelligence. At JG-2 Operations Center in Beaumont-le-Roger, France, Flight Leader Hauptmann Egon Meyer, who had pioneered the devastating head-on attack against B-17 formations, briefed his pilots on November 28th. The Americans are stubborn, but they cannot change physics. Their fighters drink fuel. Ours are fighting over home territory. Time is our ally. In late November 1943, Oberleutnant Heinz Baer of JG-1, already credited with 180 kills, described the Luftwaffe's psychological state in a letter to his family. "We are tired, yes. We have lost good men, yes. But we know how to survive. The American bombers are brave, but they come with limited protection. When their escorts turn back, and they always turn back, we own the sky again. This is our advantage, and it sustains us." The comfort of sanctuary shaped everything. It determined when to attack and when to withdraw. It defined survival. It meant that even on days when thunderbolts shot down 5 or 6 Messerschmitts, the surviving German pilots could break contact, run for home, and live to fight tomorrow. The American escorts couldn't chase them all the way to the ground, couldn't strafe them during landing approach, couldn't loiter over Luftwaffe bases waiting for vulnerable targets. This reality created a strange equilibrium. The Americans bombed, but at terrible cost. The Germans defended, but with mounting losses. Both sides bled. But German pilots defending their homeland could always find a way out of any engagement. They controlled when fights ended. They controlled their own survival. December 1943 began like the previous 6 months. Luftwaffe intelligence tracked American bomber formations, assembling over England, predicted their targets, scrambled defending fighters. On December 1st, JG-26 intercepted B-17s over Solingen. The pattern held, Attack, engage the escorts, disengage eastward when fuel runs low. The Thunderbolts turned back over the Rhine. Standard procedure. On December 5th, the same pattern. December 11th, the same. December 13th, the same. Then came December 16th, 1943. The day the pattern broke. Enemy fighters, climbing from the south. The radio warning crackled through Hauptmann Mayer's headset as JG-2 climbed to intercept B-17s over Bremen. Nothing unusual. Thunderbolts from the south meant they were already deep into Germany, already worried about fuel. Attack quickly, before they arrive in force. But these weren't Thunderbolts. Oberfeldwebel Karl Willius, flying wing for Mayer, spotted them first. Sleeker silhouette, inline engine, not radial. American markings, but different configuration. The formation climbed through 20,000 feet with a fluidity that didn't match the heavy, purposeful climb of P-47s. Mayer recognized them from intelligence photos. North American Mustangs, 9th Air Force, ground attack variant. Which made no sense. Ground attack fighters didn't escort bombers at 25,000 feet over Germany. Mayer keyed his radio. All aircraft, engage the bombers. These new fighters are probably lost. They weren't lost. They were experimenting. The Mustangs, actually P-51Bs, the first long-range variant equipped with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, had launched from English bases carrying two 75-gallon external fuel tanks. Total internal and external fuel, 419 gallons. Combat radius, 475 miles. Berlin was 585 miles from East Anglia. Not quite enough. But Bremen was 325 miles, well within range. JG-2 made their attack runs against the bombers, scoring hits, losing 2 aircraft to defensive fire. Standard engagement. The Mustangs intervened, protecting the bombers, but Mayer wasn't concerned. Break east on my command. They'll have to leave soon. At 24,000 feet over Oldenburg, 90 miles inside Germany, Mayer gave the order. The Focke-Wulf F-190 S of JG, 2 split formation, and dove hard. Standard disengagement. The Mustangs followed. At 15,000 feet, the Mustangs were still there. At 10,000 feet, still following. Mayer pulled out of his dive at 5,000 feet, 120 miles inside German territory, heading for Beaumont-le-Roger airfield. The Mustangs were above him, still hunting. They're not turning back, Willius transmitted. They're still, his transmission ended. A P-51 had lined up on his 4W100 and fired a 2-second burst. Willius's aircraft shed its canopy and went into a spin. Mayer pushed his throttle to maximum emergency power, running for home. The Mustangs didn't give up until they crossed back over the German coast. 30 minutes later, having chased JG-2 across 100 miles of German-controlled territory. That evening, Mayer filed a combat report that Luftwaffe intelligence initially dismissed. New American escort fighter demonstrates range previously thought impossible. Pursued our formation deep into German airspace without apparent fuel concern. Request immediate assessment of threat. December 20th brought confirmation P-51Bs escorted B-17s to Bremen again, and again pursued German fighters that attempted standard disengagement. JG-26, operations officer noted, enemy fighters maintained contact for 25 minutes after our withdrawal from the bomber formation. They operated over our territory as though they owned it. But these were isolated raids, limited numbers of Mustangs. Most bomber missions still featured Thunderbolts, which still had limited range. Most German fighter wings hadn't even encountered the new aircraft yet. Intelligence officers assured field commanders the Mustang is present in small numbers. The majority of escort duties remain with P-47 units of limited range. Current tactical doctrine remains valid. On December 31, 1943, Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke made his final diary entry of the year. We lost 7 pilots today, but shot down 11 bombers. The mathematics still favor us if we fight intelligently. The new year will bring more battles, but also more opportunities to defend the fatherland. We know how to survive. What Knoke didn't know, what no Luftwaffe pilot yet understood, was that December's limited Mustang appearances were a test. American strategic planning had identified the critical weakness in German fighter defense, the Sanctuary Doctrine, on January 1st, 1944. Orders went out from 8th Air Force Headquarters to 15 newly equipped fighter groups. Beginning immediately, P-51 Mustang units are cleared for maximum range escort missions. Your assignment is not merely to protect bombers. Your assignment is to destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it flies, wherever it lands, wherever it hides. There are no sanctuaries. The Luftwaffe had 6 days before the hunting began in earnest. January 11th, 1944, 27,000 feet above Halberstadt, Germany. Oberfeldwebel Franz Stigler of JG-27 watches his fuel gauge drop toward the red line. His Messerschmitt Bf-109G6 has been in continuous combat for 18 minutes, an eternity at full throttle and maximum boost. Below and to the west, the American bomber formation drones towards Brunswick, but Stigler has already made his attack pass. 2 engines smoking on a B-17. Possibly a kill? Probably not. Now comes the practice disengagement. He banks east, drops the nose, and begins the dive toward Wittenberg Airfield. Standard procedure. The P-47s will chase for 5 minutes, maybe 10, then mathematics will force them home. Stigler has performed this maneuver 47 times since June 1943. He's alive because he knows when to run. At 20,000 feet, descending through thin clouds, Stigler's wingman radios. 4 fighters, 6 o'clock high. Stigler glances back. Silver aircraft dropping into pursuit. Not the bulky radial engine silhouette of Thunderbolts. Something sleeker. Mustangs. Stigler isn't alarmed. He's 85 miles inside Germany, diving at 450 miles per hour toward a base with flak protection. Maintain course, he radios. They can't stay much longer. At 15,000 feet, the Mustangs are closer. At 10,000 feet, they're in firing range. Stigler brakes hard left, then right, jinking to spoil their aim. Tracer rounds arc past his canopy. 1 Mustang overshoots, but another slides in behind him, matching every maneuver. At 5,000 feet, approaching Wittenberg, Stigler realizes something that sends ice through his gut. These fighters aren't breaking off. They're not worried about fuel. They're going to follow him all the way to the ground. He firewalls the throttle, pushing his Bf-109 to 380 miles per hour at deck level, racing for the airfield. The Mustang behind him fires again. Rounds punch through Stigler's left wing. The airfield is ahead. He can see the runway. If he can just reach the flak umbrella, the Mustang pilot doesn't care about the flak, doesn't break pursuit, stays locked on Stigler's tail until the German fighter crosses the airfield boundary. Only then, with Stigler's aircraft trailing smoke and German anti-aircraft batteries firing desperately, does the P-51 bank away, climbing back toward altitude. Stigler lands with 11 holes in his aircraft. As ground crew swarm his damaged fighter, he stands beside the wing, hands shaking, trying to process what just happened. "They followed me home," he tells his Staffo-Kapitän. "They didn't care about fuel. They didn't care about flak. They hunted me to my own airfield." His commander studies the damage report. "You were lucky. Get your aircraft repaired." "You don't understand," Stigler says. "If they can do this, if they can chase us all the way home, there's nowhere left to run." By mid-January 1944, reports like Stigler's flooded into Luftwaffe intelligence offices. Fighter pilots across every Jagdgeschwader defending the Reich described the same phenomenon. American escorts that refused to turn back, that pursued disengaging German fighters deep into German airspace, that seemed unconcerned with fuel conservation. On January 24th, Luftwaffe Reich headquarters issued a revised tactical bulletin based on 47 separate combat reports. American P-51 Mustang demonstrates combat radius exceeding 400 miles. Pilots should not assume enemy fighters will break contact over German territory. Previous disengagement doctrine requires immediate revision. But how do you revise a doctrine that's based on simple geography? German fighter bases are in Germany. American fighter bases are in England. That fundamental reality couldn't change. The numbers told the story. A P-51B carried 184 gallons of internal fuel. With two 75-gallon drop tanks, total fuel capacity reached 334 gallons. The Merlin V1650 engine, licensed from Rolls-Royce and built by Packard, consumed roughly 70 gallons per hour at combat power. That meant nearly 5 hours of flight time, enough to fly from East Anglia to Berlin, fight for 20 minutes, and return home with reserves. Luftwaffe intelligence didn't have these precise specifications in January 1944. But they had something more immediate. The terrified reports of experienced pilots who discovered that running for home no longer guaranteed survival. Hauptmann Egon Meyer, the brilliant tactician who had developed the head-on attack against B-17s, encountered Mustangs for the first time on January 29th during an interception over Hanover. His combat report, filed hours before his death on March 2nd, described the psychological shift. "These are not defensive escorts. These are hunters who use bomber protection as bait. They wait for us to commit to attacking the bombers, then pursue us through disengagement. The tactical assumption that enemy fighters cannot sustain deep pursuit is no longer valid. We are operating without sanctuary." February 1944 transformed abstract threat assessments into brutal reality. On February 8th, American heavy bombers struck aircraft factories across central Germany. The Luftwaffe scrambled nearly 450 fighters to defend, the largest single defensive effort of the war to that point. The scale of the battle guaranteed kills for both sides. The Luftwaffe shot down 34 bombers, but they lost 66 fighters, most to the escorting P-51s that refused to leave German airspace even after the bombers turned for home. Oberleutnant Heinz Nock, who had begun the year confident in German survival tactics, wrote in his diary on February 10th, "We lost Becker, Hoffmann, and young Dietrich today." All three were shot down during withdrawal from combat, chased by the Mustangs that followed them to low altitude. Becker was my wingman for 8 months. He survived the Eastern Front, survived 83 missions over Germany. He died 5 kilometers from our airfield, shot down while trying to land. There is a word for what this feels like, but I'm not permitted to write it in official records. The psychological impact rippled through every fighter squadron. Veteran pilots who had internalized survival through disengagement now faced a fundamental problem. Disengagement didn't work anymore. The Americans could chase them anywhere. The sky over Germany, which had been a battleground with exit routes, was becoming a cage. At JG-11 Operations Room in Oldenburg, Gruppenkommandeur Major Gunther Specht held a briefing on February 15th that acknowledged the new reality. The Americans have solved their escort problem. They can now reach any target in Germany with continuous fighter protection. More critically, they can pursue our aircraft after combat. Every pilot must understand you are no longer safe just because you've broken contact with the bombers. You must evade the escorts all the way to landing. One pilot raised his hand. Sir, how do we do that? They're faster than us in level flight. They dive as fast as we do. They climb better above 25,000 feet. And they have enough fuel to chase us for 30 minutes. Specht had no answer. The tactical problem was becoming existential. On February 20th, 1944, the Americans launched Operation Argument, what would later be known as Big Week. 6 days of maximum effort bombing raids against German aircraft production facilities, all protected by deep penetration fighter escort. Over 1,000 American heavy bombers struck targets simultaneously, with nearly 800 escort fighters, including 16 groups of P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had at the raids, and for the first time, German fighter pilots experienced what total tactical helplessness felt like. Lieutenant Heinz Baer of JG-1, one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled pilots, with 204 confirmed kills, engaged American bombers over Leipzig on February 20th. His after-action report described the encounter with clinical precision, made firing pass on B-17 formation, scored strikes on No. 3 aircraft, disengaged to east as 4 P-51s converged on my position, descended to 8,000 feet, maintained maximum speed. Enemy fighters pursued for 23 minutes, was forced to jettison external fuel tank, and utilize full emergency power. Major Gunther Roll pulled from the Eastern Front to command a defense group, described the situation in a letter to Luftwaffe Personnel Command on February 28th, requesting immediate tactical guidance. Current doctrine of attacking bombers and disengaging from escorts is producing unsustainable casualties. Enemy P-51 units are specifically hunting German fighters during withdrawal phase. Experienced pilots are being killed not in the initial engagement, but during return to base, when fuel is low and defensive options are limited. We cannot continue to operate under the assumption that German airspace provides sanctuary. Luftwaffe High Command had no tactical solution, because there was no tactical solution. The P-51's range had created a strategic checkmate. German fighters had to engage the bombers. Allowing bombers to destroy German industry unchallenged meant losing the war even faster. But engaging the bombers meant exposing yourself to escorts that could chase you anywhere, that had fuel to loiter and hunt, that could follow you to the ground and strafe you on landing approach. By early March 1944, Luftwaffe pilot briefings included a new section, Mustang Evasion Protocols. The recommendations were desperate. Use clouds, use ground terrain. Dive to the deck and stay there. If wounded, do not attempt to land at primary base. They will strafe you in the pattern. Divert to auxiliary fields. Never assume you're safe just because you've broken visual contact. These weren't the briefings of an air force that controlled its own territory. These were the briefings of hunted men. On March 2nd, 1944, Hauptmann Egon Meyer, 102 confirmed kills, recipient of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, the pilot who had invented the head-on bomber attack, scrambled from Montmédy, France, to intercept B-17s over Montdidier. JG-2's combat report noted that Meyer successfully attacked a bomber formation, then was engaged by P-51s during disengagement. His aircraft was last seen in a steep dive with 2 Mustangs in pursuit. He crashed near Montmedy. He was 26 years old. The pilot, who had mastered the mathematics of attacking B-17s, died because he couldn't escape the fighters that protected them. His death sent a message through every Luftwaffe fighter squadron. If Meyer could be run down and killed over France, not even deep in Germany, but over France, where the Allies shouldn't have had range advantage, then no one was safe anywhere. On March 6th, the Americans struck Berlin for the first time with heavy bomber formations. The symbolic importance was profound, but the tactical reality was worse. P-51s escorted the bombers all the way to the German capital, engaged the defending fighters, then chased survivors back toward their bases. Berlin was 585 miles from East Anglia. The Americans could reach the heart of the Reich and still have fuel to hunt. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, witnessing the battle from his command post, later wrote, "On March 6, we understood that we had lost air superiority over Germany. The Americans demonstrated they could go anywhere, strike anything, and protect themselves doing it. Our pilots went up knowing they might not come down. Worse, they went up knowing that if they did come down, it might be with Mustangs circling overhead, waiting to strafe them in their parachutes or on their landing approach. The Luftwaffe's tactical assumptions had been built on a foundation of sanctuary. That foundation was gone. And with it went the confidence that had sustained German fighter pilots through 2 years of defensive combat. What remained was fear, mathematics, and the growing certainty that every mission might be the last. March 15th, 1944, 31,000 feet above Brunswick, Germany. Lieutenant Walther Hagener of JG-26 scans the sky with the methodical discipline of someone who has survived 72 combat missions. The American bomber stream stretches from horizon to horizon, 300 heavy bombers in tight formation. Above them, the sun glints off dozens of escort fighters. Hagener identifies them immediately. Mustangs. All Mustangs. No Thunderbolts, no Lightnings, just the silver hunters that have turned German airspace into a killing ground. His Staffelkapitan's voice crackles over the radio. "Attack on my command. Hit the bombers fast. Break east immediately. Use maximum speed." The order contains an unspoken acknowledgement. We're not trying to destroy this formation. We're trying to survive contact with it. JG-26 dives through 28,000 feet, building speed for the attack. Hagener lines up on a B-17, fires a 3-second burst, sees strikes on the wing, then rams his throttle forward and brakes hard right. The entire attack run takes less than 8 seconds. Already the Mustangs are converging. What happens next will recur, with variations thousands of times over the next 14 months. It is the tactical reality that breaks the Luftwaffe's spirit. 4 P-51s drop into pursuit of Hagener's flight. He pushes his Bf-109G6 to maximum continuous power, diving east at 450 miles per hour. The Mustangs follow. At 25,000 feet, Hagener jinks left, then right, trying to force an overshoot. The lead Mustang mirrors every movement. At 20,000 feet, one of Hagener's wingmen radios, I'm hit. Then nothing but static. Hagener continues his dive. 15,000 feet. 10,000 feet. The Mustangs are still there, still patient, still hunting. He levels out at 3,000 feet, racing northeast toward Wittenberg. The Mustangs settle into trail formation, matching his speed exactly. They're not trying to close for a kill yet. They're waiting for him to make a mistake, to pull too hard, to run out of ideas. For 15 minutes, this chase continues. Hagener burns through his fuel reserves, his engine temperature climbs into the red zone, and still the Mustangs follow. Finally, mercifully, Hagenna spots a cloud bank ahead. He plunges into it, brakes hard left inside the clouds, then reverses right, emerging on a different heading. The Mustangs are gone, or at least not visible. He's lost them, maybe. He lands at Wittenberg with fuel for 5 more minutes of flight. As ground crew refuel his aircraft, Hagenna sits in the cockpit, hands trembling. Of the 6 Bf-109s that attacked the bomber formation with him, 3 made it back. The other 3 were run down by Mustangs during the withdrawal. That evening, Hagenna writes in his personal diary, "We are no longer fighter pilots. We are targets. The Americans have unlimited fuel, unlimited time, unlimited patience. They can chase us until we make a single error, then kill us. I have 72 missions. Becker had 89 when they got him. Hoffman had 115. How many does one need before the statistics catch up?" The diary entry captures what Luftwaffe combat reports were documenting with increasing precision. Worse, the quality of kills was changing. Experienced pilots, the expertin with 50, 100, 150 victories, were being systematically eliminated. On March 21st, Hauptmann Wilhelm Schilling, 50 kills, was shot down by P-51s over Lüneburg. March 27th, Oberleutnant Kurt Brendel, 46 kills, shot down near Brunswick. April 8th, Major Gunther Rahl, 275 kills, third highest scoring pilot in aviation history, was shot down and severely wounded by P-51s over the Austrian border. Rahl survived, but his post-war testimony described the engagement with bitter clarity. "I shot down 2 B-17s, then was engaged by P-51s during my withdrawal. I used every evasion technique I knew. Diving, turning, using the sun, using clouds. They stayed with me for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of continuous combat, burning fuel I didn't have, until finally one of them got the angle he needed. He put 50 caliber rounds through my cockpit. I was lucky. The rounds hit my right hand and back, not my head. But I understood in that moment that all my experience, all my kills, meant nothing against an opponent who could simply outlast me. The phrase, "simply outlast me," defined the Mustang's psychological impact. German pilots weren't being outfought in traditional dogfighting terms. They were being exhausted, run down, hunted to the point where mistakes became inevitable. American pilots recognized what was happening. Major Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would finish the war with 22 aerial victories, described Mustang tactics in a debriefing on April 12th. "We don't chase them to get a quick kill. We chase them because we know they're already worried about fuel. Every minute we stay on their tail is a minute their fuel gauge drops. Eventually they have to make a choice. Try to fight us and run out of fuel, or run for home and expose their tail. Either way, we have the advantage." The Mustang's range created time pressure that no German tactical innovation could solve. F-190S and Bf-190 carried roughly 88 gallons of internal fuel, about 100 minutes of combat flight time. P-51s, with drop tanks, could fight for nearly 200 minutes. In any extended engagement, the German pilot would face fuel crisis first. And the Americans knew it. April 1944 brought a tactical evolution that turned psychological pressure into outright terror. Airfield strafing. P-51 units, having escorted bombers to the target and back, began sweeping across German airfields during the return flight, catching fighters during their most vulnerable moments, landing, refueling, or parked on the ground. On April 11th, JG-3's base at Salzwedel was strafed by P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group. 8 Bf-109s were destroyed on the ground. 4 more were shot down in the landing pattern, and 2 pilots were killed while running from their aircraft to shelter. The attack lasted 7 minutes. The Americans had enough fuel to loiter, to circle, to hunt systematically. Oberst Walter Dahl, Geschwader Commodore of JG-3, filed a report to Luftwaffe Command that bordered on desperation. Request immediate tactical guidance. Enemy fighters are now attacking our bases during landing recovery operations. Pilots returning from combat, low on fuel and ammunition, are being engaged by fresh enemy fighters. The psychology of airfield attacks was devastating. Pilots survived brutal combat over the target, burned through their fuel reserves evading Mustangs during withdrawal, then had to worry about being shot down within sight of their own runway. Some pilots began diverting to auxiliary fields, rather than risk landing at their primary base. Others requested transfers to night fighter units, where at least they wouldn't face P-51s. On April 24th, Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke experienced the new reality firsthand. Returning from a mission over Mannheim, fuel critical, he entered the landing pattern at Bad Wurishofen, only to see P-51s diving on the airfield. 2 Bf-100 and 9s ahead of him, in the pattern burst into flames from strafing fire. Knoke broke off his approach, climbed back to 2,000 feet, and circled for 12 minutes while the Mustangs methodically destroyed everything on the ground. He landed with fuel for 90 seconds of flight time after the Americans finally departed. His diary entry that evening: "We are being hunted to extinction. They kill us in the air. They kill us on the ground. They kill us while we're trying to land. There is no safe moment, no safe place. Today I watched Schroeder die 500 meters from our runway, shot down while his landing gear was extended. He'd survived the mission. He'd made it home. And they killed him anyway." By May 1944, Luftwaffe pilot morale reports, classified documents that circulated only among senior command, documented what field commanders already knew. The fighter force was breaking psychologically. Pilots with 2030 missions, who might once have been considered experienced, were requesting transfers, claiming medical issues, or simply refusing to fly. One report from JG-11, dated May 8th, noted, of 18 pilots in Staffel strength, 6 have requested medical evaluation for combat exhaustion. 4 are hospitalized with stress-related conditions, and 3 have been removed from flight status for disciplinary issues related to refusing orders. Operational strength: 5 pilots capable of combat. The few remaining Expert 10 pilots with 100-plus kills found themselves flying with teenagers who had 30 hours of flight training and had never fired their guns before their first combat mission. These novice pilots lasted an average of 7 missions before being killed or wounded. The veterans knew what watching these boys die meant. They were next. Experience only delayed the inevitable. Major Heinz Bahr, now commanding JG-1 with 208 confirmed kills, wrote to a friend in May 1944, "I've survived 500 combat missions, fought on 4 fronts, shot down every type of Allied aircraft. None of that matters anymore. The Mustangs are everywhere. They can go anywhere. They have time we don't have, fuel we don't have, pilots we don't have. I take off every morning knowing that today might be the day they finally get me. Not because I've lost my skill, because they have numbers, time, and range. You can't fight mathematics." The phrase, "you can't fight mathematics," appears in multiple Luftwaffe documents from spring 1944. It acknowledged a brutal reality. Even if German pilots maintained tactical parity on a 1-to-1 basis, which they no longer did, The Americans could afford losses the Luftwaffe couldn't. An American P-51 pilot shot down over Germany could be replaced within 48 hours. A German pilot killed over Germany couldn't be replaced at all, because replacement training had collapsed under the weight of fuel shortages and veteran instructor losses. On May 28th, American intelligence intercepted and decrypted a Luftwaffe communication from General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. The message's tone reflected institutional despair. Fighter force morale is at lowest point since beginning of war. Pilot losses in April, 489 killed or missing. Replacement pilots received 396. Replacement pilots with adequate training, 127. Request immediate cessation of daylight operations until pilot training can be reconstituted. Göring's response, sent the same day. There will be no cessation of operations. The Führer demands aggressive defense of the Reich. Pilots are to attack with determination regardless of odds. The disconnect between high command and field reality was total. Göring demanded aggression. Pilots couldn't even survive defensive operations. By early June 1944, Luftwaffe fighter squadrons defending against American daylight raids operated under a grim certainty. Every mission was a death sentence for someone in the formation. The only question was who. The Americans would come with 500 bombers and 500 escorts. The Luftwaffe would scramble 200 fighters, of which perhaps 150 would be serviceable. The escorts would include 300-plus P-51s that could chase German fighters anywhere. Do the mathematics. Factor in fuel limitations, pilot experience levels, tactical options. The result was the same every time. The Luftwaffe would shoot down 1-5, 2-0 bombers and lose 4-0-5-0 fighters in return. The Americans would replace their losses within 3 days. The Luftwaffe would patch together enough aircraft from salvage to field maybe 30 replacements, flown by teenagers who would die on their second or third mission. On June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy began. Luftwaffe units in France were ordered to provide air support. They couldn't. They'd been bled dry defending against American bombing raids over Germany. The few squadrons still operational in France flew missions against overwhelming Allied air superiority, including P-51s operating from temporary forward bases in Normandy within weeks of the invasion. Oberleutnant Joseph Prille, commanding JG-26's remnants in France, flew 2 missions over the invasion beaches on June 6th. His after-action report described Allied air activity as complete air supremacy, estimated 200-plus fighters visible at all times, unable to effectively engage ground targets due to immediate enemy fighter response. Request withdrawal to Germany for reconstitution. The request was denied. JG-26 would continue flying against Allied fighters in France until the unit was effectively destroyed. On August 17, 1944, Prille was shot down by P-51s near Brussels. He survived, bailed out with severe burns. Of the 124 pilots who had served in JG-26 since January 1944, 96 were dead or missing. The unit that had once been the Luftwaffe's most elite fighter wing was gone. By summer 1944, the Mustang's dominance was so complete that Luftwaffe tactical doctrine essentially became avoid combat whenever possible. Intelligence reports instructed pilots to visually identify escort types before committing to an attack. If Mustangs were present in strength, attacks were to be broken off. The Americans had achieved something extraordinary. German fighters were running from their airspace, abandoning bombers to attack German industry unchallenged. On July 7, 1944, over 1,000 American heavy bombers struck targets across central Germany. The Luftwaffe scrambled 150 fighters. They shot down 9 bombers and lost 28 fighters to P-51s. The bombers destroyed 3 aircraft factories, killing 1,800 workers and destroying enough production capacity to cost the Luftwaffe 400 aircraft it would never build. The mathematics of annihilation were playing out in real time, and the one variable the Luftwaffe couldn't change was the range of the aircraft hunting them. August 27, 1944. Rechlin Test Facility, Northern Germany. Oberst Gordon Golub, Inspector of Day Fighters, watches a demonstration of the Luftwaffe's newest hope, the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter. The sleek aircraft accelerates down the runway, climbs at an angle no propeller-driven fighter can match, and disappears into the clouds at 540 miles per hour. Golub has seen the specifications. Maximum speed, 559 miles per hour. Rate of climb, 3,900 feet per minute. Armament, 430mm cannons capable of destroying a B-17 with a single burst. On paper, the Me-262 solves every tactical problem the Mustang created. It's 120 miles per hour faster in level flight. It can climb to 30,000 feet in 7 minutes, half the time required by a P-51. Its cannons can destroy bombers from ranges where defensive gunners can't respond effectively. It is, objectively, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Golub returns to his office and writes a memo to Reichsmarschall Goering. Me-262 demonstrates performance superiority over all Allied fighters. Recommend immediate mass production and deployment. Estimate 200 Me-262S could restore air superiority over Reich within 3 months. The memo receives a response on September 3rd. Führer has designated Me-262 as high-speed bomber, not fighter. Production priority assigned to ground attack variant. Fighter production to continue focus on FW-100 and BF-109 models. Golub reads the response 3 times, trying to comprehend the decision. The Luftwaffe is being systematically destroyed by American fighters it cannot escape. The Me-262 can escape anything in the sky, and Hitler wants to use it as a bomber. It doesn't matter, because by September 1944, the Luftwaffe's disintegration has progressed beyond what any single aircraft type can solve. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe fielded approximately 1,470 single-engine fighters defending the Reich, flown by pilots averaging 110 hours of combat experience. By September 1944, the force had grown to 1,850 fighters, but average pilot experience had dropped to 47 hours. The force was larger but catastrophically weaker. Training unit commanders reported the crisis in increasingly desperate terms. On September 12th, the commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 104, a training unit, sent a report to Luftwaffe Personnel Command. We are graduating pilots with 30 hours flight time and 0 gunnery training. They cannot navigate in bad weather. They cannot perform formation flying. They cannot recover from spins. We are sending them to operational units, where they will encounter American pilots with 300-plus hours of training and 6 months of combat experience. This is not training. This is murder. The report was filed, acknowledged, and ignored. The Luftwaffe needed pilots. Whether those pilots could survive didn't change the operational requirement to field them. On September 11, 1944, JG-77's base at Neubiberg received 12 replacement pilots, fresh from training. Their average age was 19. Their average flight time was 35 hours. The squadron commander, Major Johannes Steinhoff, assigned each novice to an experienced pilot for their first mission. On September 12th, JG-77 scrambled to intercept B-17s over Munich. Of the 12 replacement pilots, 8 were shot down during their first combat. 3 were killed, 5 bailed out wounded, none scored a kill. Steinhoff's personal diary entry that evening: "I watched them die. Boys who didn't know how to use the radio properly, who couldn't identify aircraft types, who couldn't hold formation. The P-51s massacred them. It wasn't combat, it was execution. We are feeding children to wolves and calling it defense of the Reich." The Mustang force, meanwhile, had grown into an overwhelming tactical weapon. By September 1944, the 8th Air Force fielded 14 P-51 groups, totaling over 800 operational aircraft. Pilots rotated through a systematic training pipeline: stateside instruction, then operational training in England, then gradual introduction to combat missions with experienced flight leaders. American P-51 pilots typically flew 2030 training missions before encountering enemy aircraft. Luftwaffe pilots were encountering Mustangs on their first mission. The experience gap created kill ratios that defied military logic. In September 1944, P-51 units shot down German fighters at a rate of 6.3, 1. For every Mustang lost in aerial combat, 6.3 German fighters were destroyed. The ratio would have been even more lopsided, except that many German pilots simply fled when they spotted P-51 formations, declining combat entirely. Luftwaffe intelligence reports from September documented this behavioral change with clinical precision. Pilot reluctance to engage enemy fighters when odds are unfavorable is becoming widespread. Multiple instances of formations breaking off attacks on bomber streams when P-51 units arrive in strength. Disciplinary action against pilots refusing combat is impractical given overall pilot shortage. Translation: German pilots were so terrified of Mustangs that they were refusing to fight, and the Luftwaffe couldn't court-martial them because there weren't enough pilots left. On October 7th, 1944, the Americans launched their largest raid yet. 1,159 heavy bombers striking oil facilities across Germany, escorted by 777 fighters, including 450 P-51s. The Luftwaffe scrambled every available fighter, nearly 400 aircraft, the largest offensive effort since Big Week in February. The results were catastrophic. The Luftwaffe shot down 12 bombers. They lost 108 fighters destroyed and another 67 damaged beyond repair. Pilot losses: 89 killed, 28 wounded. Of those killed, 47 were shot down by P-51s during withdrawal from combat. They never got close to their bases. They were hunted down in the sky over their own country, over their own fields and cities, killed while trying to run away. Oberst Hannes Trautluft, General der Jagdflieger's operations officer, wrote in his official report on October 9th, "Current loss rates are unsustainable. At present, pilot casualty rate, the fighter force will cease to exist as combat-effective organization by January 1945. No tactical or technical solution within current operational parameters can prevent this outcome. Request permission to withdraw fighter forces from daylight operations until American bombing offensive can be countered through alternative means." Alternative means. Trautluft meant jets, rockets, or negotiated peace. Something, anything, other than continuing to send pilots up to die against an enemy that controlled the sky so completely that German fighters couldn't even run away effectively. The response from Goering, dated October 11th, "Defeatist assessments are not acceptable. Fighter pilots are to attack with maximum aggression. No withdrawal from daylight operations will be authorized. The Luftwaffe's institutional leadership had disconnected from battlefield reality so completely that they were ordering attacks that couldn't succeed, against enemies that couldn't be beaten, with resources that didn't exist. November 1944 brought the Mustang's tactical dominance to its ultimate expression. The Americans stopped worrying about protecting bombers and started hunting German fighters as a primary objective. On November 2nd, 8th Air Force Headquarters issued a directive that formalized what P-51 units had been doing for months. Primary mission objective is destruction of German Air Force. Bomber escort is secondary priority. Fighter units are authorized to pursue enemy aircraft to destruction regardless of bomber formation location. Translation: go kill German fighters. Don't wait for them to attack bombers. Hunt them proactively. On November 8, 1944, this new doctrine achieved its highest profile kill. Oberst Walter Nowotny, 258 confirmed victories. Commander of the newly formed Me-262 jet unit, took off from Akhmer Airfield to intercept American bombers. Flying the revolutionary jet that was supposed to restore German air superiority, Nowotny shot down one P-51 during his attack run. Then, his jet developed engine problems. He radioed that he was returning to base. 3 P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group spotted the damaged Me-262 descending toward Akhmer. They pursued. Nowotny's jet was faster, even with one engine malfunctioning, but he was committed to landing. His fuel was nearly exhausted. The P-51s caught him in the landing pattern at 500 feet altitude, 2 miles from the runway. They fired. Nowotny's Me-262 exploded, crashed into a field, and burned. The Luftwaffe's highest-scoring pilot against Western Allied aircraft, flying the most advanced fighter in the world, was shot down within sight of his own airfield by 3 American pilots in piston-engine fighters. The symbolism was lost on no one. Lieutenant Franz Stigler, who had survived his January encounter with Mustangs, witnessed Nowotny's death from the ground. Decades later, he would describe the explosion. We knew who it was immediately. Only one Me-262 was airborne. Walter Nowotny was dead. If they could kill him in that aircraft, over our own base, then none of us would survive. The mathematics were final. We were already dead. We just hadn't stopped moving yet. By December 1944, Luftwaffe day fighter operations had devolved into something between tragedy and farce. Units existed on organizational charts, but had no operational aircraft. Pilots were assigned to squadrons that had no fuel for training. Replacement aircraft arrived at bases that had no pilots qualified to fly them. The infrastructure of an air force remained, but the substance had been destroyed. On December 17, 1944, JG-300, a unit that had once fielded 70-plus fighters, scrambled 9 FW-190S to intercept B-17s over Frankfurt. None of the 9 pilots had more than 15 hours of combat experience. They encountered 40-plus P-51s escorting the bombers. 7 of the 9 German fighters were shot down within the first 4 minutes of combat. The 2 survivors fled without engaging, landed at a different base, and requested transfer to ground forces. Christmas 1944 approached with the Luftwaffe fighter force on the verge of complete collapse. Senior commanders knew it. Experienced pilots knew it. The terrified teenagers being fed into the grinder as replacement pilots knew it. Only the high command seemed unable to acknowledge what every combat report documented. The Americans owned the sky, and the Mustang was the weapon that had taken it from them. On December 31st, 1944, Reichsmarschall Goering visited JG-2's base at Altenstadt. He addressed the assembled pilots, promising new aircraft, better training, and ultimate victory. After his speech, A young lieutenant with 3 missions and 2 weeks of life remaining raised his hand and asked, "Sir, what are we supposed to do when the Mustangs chase us all the way to landing?" Goring stared at the pilot for 10 seconds, then turned and left without answering. Because there was no answer. The P-51's range had created a tactical problem that had no solution within the bounds of what the Luftwaffe could field. German fighters couldn't run. They couldn't hide. They couldn't fight with any reasonable expectation of survival. The sky over Germany had become a hunting ground, and every Luftwaffe pilot who took off did so knowing he was the prey. January 14th, 1945. 19,000 feet above Magdeburg, Germany. Unteroffizier Heinz Snoke climbs through thin clouds in his Bf-109 G-14, leading a formation of 4 fighters, all that JG-11 could make operational this morning. Below, somewhere in the gray haze, 300 American heavy bombers drone toward oil refineries at Durban. Above, certainly, the escorts are waiting. Snoke has 120 combat missions. He's 23 years old. He's one of the most experienced pilots left alive in JG-11. The 3 pilots flying with him have 11, 8, and 6 missions respectively. The youngest turned 18 3 weeks ago. Through a break in the clouds, Snoke spots the bomber formation. He also spots their escorts, 50, maybe 60 P-51s, flying in loose formations 5,000 feet above the bombers. Standard American tactic. Wait for the German fighters to commit to attacking the bombers, then dive on them during the attack run. Snoke keys his radio. Maintain altitude. Do not engage. His wingman, the 18-year-old, responds. But we're supposed to attack the bombers. Snoke's reply is sharp. You want to die in the next 3 minutes. They're waiting for us. We're not attacking. For 20 minutes, Snoke's tiny formation shadows the American Armada, maintaining distance, never committing to attack. Eventually, the bomber stream passes beyond effective interception range. The mission ends without contact, without kills, also without losses. Snoke lands at Bad Warashofen and files a combat report that acknowledges, in bureaucratic language, what every surviving Luftwaffe pilot knows. Attacking American bomber formations defended by P-51s in strength is suicide. Better to follow at a distance, hope the escorts make a mistake, or simply decline combat and survive another day. His commanding officer reads the report and says nothing. What can he say? Snoke followed orders to intercept. He also followed the unspoken directive to survive if possible. Court-martialing pilots for not committing suicide isn't viable when you need every pilot you can keep alive. By January 1945, the Luftwaffe's day fighter force existed in a state of organizational fiction. On paper, the force fielded nearly 2,000 single-engine fighters. In reality, fewer than 800 were operational on any given day, flown by pilots who averaged 40 hours of total flight time, and 3, 4 combat missions. The Americans, by contrast, fielded 15 P-51 groups totaling over 900 operational aircraft, flown by pilots averaging 250-plus hours of training, and commanded by flight leaders with 50-plus missions of combat experience. The quantitative advantage was 2. 1. The qualitative advantage was incalculable. American pilots recognized what they were facing. Major George Preddy, 357th Fighter Group, who would become the top P-51 ace with 26.83 aerial victories before his death on December 25, 1944, described German opposition in a November briefing. They've got nothing left. Half the pilots we encounter are so inexperienced they can't maintain formation. They panic when we attack. They make basic mistakes, turning the wrong direction, trying to climb away, freezing on the controls. It's like shooting at the range, except the targets are trying to run away. Post-war analysis of Luftwaffe pilot training records revealed the catastrophic decline in preparation. In 1942, German fighter pilots received an average of 240 hours of flight training before operational deployment. By January 1945, that number had dropped to 40 hours. Many pilots deployed with 0 hours of gunnery training, 0 hours of formation flying, and 0 hours of instrument flight instruction. The result was predictable. In January 1945, the average Luftwaffe fighter pilot survived 7.3 combat missions before being killed, wounded, or captured. Experience didn't significantly improve those odds because there weren't enough experienced pilots left to establish meaningful statistical patterns. On January 29, 1945, American bombers struck oil facilities at Kassel. The Luftwaffe scrambled 87 fighters to intercept. They were engaged by over 200 P-51s. The Germans shot down 0 bombers. They lost 37 fighters destroyed and 14 damaged. Pilot casualties, 29 killed, 8 wounded. Not one of the pilots killed that day had more than 15 combat missions. The experienced pilots had learned not to engage when the odds were this catastrophic. The inexperienced pilots didn't survive long enough to learn. Captured German pilots, interrogated by American intelligence officers, provided testimony that documented the psychological collapse. A lieutenant from JG-27, shot down on February 3rd, told his interrogators, "We know we're going to die. The question is just when. Maybe this mission, maybe the next one. You have fuel to chase us anywhere. You have enough pilots that losing one doesn't matter. We don't. Every pilot we lose is irreplaceable. So we go up, we try to avoid you, maybe we attack a straggling bomber if we're lucky, then we run. And sometimes you catch us and kill us. That's what every mission is now." Another pilot, Feldwebel from JG-11, captured after bailing out near Hanover on February 14th. "I had 6 missions. The oldest pilot in my staffel had 19 missions. Our Captain died 2 weeks ago. He had 80 missions. They got him during landing. Who's supposed to teach us how to survive? The old pilots are all dead. The Americans killed them. Now they're killing us." The interrogation report circulated through American intelligence with a common assessment. German fighter pilot morale has collapsed. They are not fighting to win. They are flying because they're ordered to fly, and hoping to survive long enough for the war to end. On March 3rd, 1945, over 1,100 American heavy bombers struck synthetic oil plants across central Germany, escorted by nearly 700 fighters. The Luftwaffe scrambled 53 fighters, total, across all defending units. They shot down 2 bombers and lost 14 fighters. The numerical disparity had become so severe that German commanders couldn't even assemble forces large enough to threaten American formations. Major Heinrich Bahr, one of the few surviving Experten with 220 victories, flew his last mission on March 23rd, 1945. He engaged a formation of P-51s over Göttingen, shot 1 down, then was swarmed by 8 more. He bailed out wounded, his aircraft destroyed. Decades later, he would write, "I survived 1,000 combat missions against every enemy Germany faced. Soviet fighters, British fighters, American fighters. The P-51 was the only aircraft that made me feel helpless, not because it was superior in dogfighting. Many aircraft could turn tighter, but because it could chase you forever. There was no escape, no sanctuary. You either shot it down or you died. Those were the only 2 options." April 1945 brought the mathematical conclusion to the air campaign. On April 10th, the Luftwaffe flew 55 fighter sorties, defending against 1,261 American heavy bombers and 850 escort fighters. The ratio was 25-1. The Germans shot down 1 bomber. They lost 8 fighters. The defense had become so ineffective that American bomber crews stopped reporting Luftwaffe fighter attacks in their mission debriefs. The German fighter force had ceased to exist as a meaningful threat. The final statistics documented total collapse. January 1944 to May 1945, the Luftwaffe lost 14,370 fighter pilots killed in action or missing. Of these, approximately 8,200 were killed in combat with American escort fighters, primarily P-51s. The Mustang force, during the same period, lost 2,520 aircraft destroyed in combat, with approximately 1,100 lost in aerial combat with Luftwaffe fighters. The kill ratio, 8,200 German pilots killed versus 1,100 American pilots lost to German fighters, was 7.51. For every American fighter pilot who died fighting the Luftwaffe, 7 German pilots died fighting P-51s. But the most devastating statistic wasn't the kill ratio. It was the survival rate. In 1943, before P-51s deployed in strength, the average Luftwaffe fighter pilot defending the Reich could expect to survive 50 combat missions if he flew intelligently and mastered tactical disengagement. By early 1945, survival expectancy had dropped to 7 missions. The Mustang's range had eliminated the disengagement option. German pilots could no longer run away, and that meant experience couldn't save them. On April 21, 1945, General the Jagdflieger Adolf Galland flew his last combat mission, leading an elite unit of experienced pilots flying Me-262 jets. They shot down several P-51s, proof that German pilot skill, given superior equipment, could still compete. But there were 30 Me-262S operational in all of Germany that day, versus 900-plus P-51s. Galland's unit was an anomaly, a demonstration of what might have been if Germany had fielded jets 2 years earlier. After the war, Galland wrote in his memoirs, "The P-51 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed our operational concept. We built our defensive strategy around the assumption that we could disengage when necessary, that we owned the airspace over our own territory, that we could survive to fight again tomorrow." The Mustang eliminated all of those assumptions. It could follow us anywhere. It could hunt us over our own bases. It turned our territory into enemy territory. A fighter force that cannot disengage from unfavorable combat is a fighter force that will be destroyed. And we were destroyed. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The Luftwaffe's fighter force, which had begun the war as perhaps the most skilled and experienced aerial combat organization in history, had been systematically annihilated. Of the approximately 28,000 fighter pilots who served in the Luftwaffe during the war, over 19,000 were killed. The majority died between January 1944 and May 1945, during the period when P-51 Mustangs dominated the skies over Europe. During the reunion, a former Oberleutnant from JG-26 gave a speech that summarized the collective experience. "We fought the Soviets, who had numbers. We fought the British, who had determination. But the Americans had something worse than numbers or determination. They had range. They built a fighter that could follow us anywhere, that gave us nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, nowhere to survive." The P-51 Mustang didn't just kill German pilots. It killed the possibility of German pilots surviving. That was its true weapon. Not speed, Not firepower, not maneuverability. Range. The ability to hunt us in our own sky until we were extinct. The audience of survivors sat in silence. They knew he was right. Today, a restored P-51D Mustang sits in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The placard describes it as the fighter that won air superiority over Europe. But to the German pilots who survived the war, the Mustang represented something more specific.